All right, we're back in my garage. It is like 10 degrees outside. We've got 18 inches of snow that fell about a week ago that's stuck around because it's still freezing ass cold. We're gonna do the first winter project. What you see on the bike right now in the rear shocks is Legend 12-inch Revos. So these are 110-pound springs on the Legend rear shocks. Revo indicates that there's adjustable rebound dampening. And then you can see I've got them turned way down. So I've got hardly any preload on there. And that's how I would typically ride the bike, because I always ride single person. Sometimes the bags are full on trips, and then I'll throw one more turn on each one of these. But I run them pretty light because I don't have any other passenger. My wife rides her own bike, so I don't have to worry about a second rider. Wife's got the same setup on hers, but she's got 90-pound springs. And then in the front of both bikes, we also have the Axio front fork cartridges. So what I ran into is the ride was pretty good, although the 12-inch shock, when I went to buy them from Legend, they said, hey, you probably should really think about a 13-inch shock. They're not that much different in the ride height. What I wanted was factory look as far as the height of the bike, and what you get is sitting right here, it's at 12 inches from center bolt to center bolt, and that's factory height. So it looks good sitting there. When you get on it, you're supposed to have a ½ inch of droop in the rear suspension, which then gives you some ability for the suspension to move normally, because the Harley factory ones would ride fully extended all the time. So you wouldn't have any way for the bike to droop into potholes and things like that. That's why they rode like shit. So with a little bit of droop in it, you're taking up a lot of the suspension travel that's here, and you don't have a whole lot more compression. I actually have got it dialed in about 5/8 inch droop when I get on the bike, and that's what I felt was comfortable. So it's probably running, a little bit under 11.5 inches of shock length, which in effect lowers the bike. Well, the same thing happened to the front when you put the Axio suspension in. This is the standard Axio suspension, and by my measurement, it dropped the bike about 1 inch once you got on it. And as we're all used to, you'd normally be dragging your floorboards around corners, but with the lowered ride height, I'm dragging off my the floorboard support now, and I've hit that pretty hard a few times, making turns where there's any kind of an arc in the road. So what I'm gonna do is switch out the 12-inch for 13-inch. So I did a full season on the 12-inch, and they were significantly better than the factory shocks. This is exactly how the shocks come. You get a little bit of instructions, your packing list, and then these are the Revo 13-inch. I just got them in silver. They come with a few spacers. Just follow the instructions on how you install them. So I'm going to swap the 12s out for the 13-inch, and you'll see you've got an extra inch of rod there showing. So the difference is double the suspension. I'm going to take some measurements to see if this is actually sagging a little bit while the bike is sitting here. I'm not sure that it is, but it may be, so that may be why some of that looks significantly longer on the 13-inch. But I got to measure and see, and then I'll show you how to do the install. It's super easy. The bike's sitting in a chalk right now. If you don't have one, a chalk at least, I recommend you get something like this. It makes a huge difference in working on the bike because all you do is ride up into it. It'll hold the bike upright, and then you throw a jack underneath the frame, and then it's super stable. You can do all this rear shock stuff without any problem. So if the shock is fully extended right now, which it may not be, it should be 12 1/4 between. That's what my original measurement was. Let's take a look. We're actually at 11 3/4. So we're getting about a 1/2 inch sag without me on the bike. And then you can see what, there's probably a little bit more sag there, but there's no way for me to measure it while I'm on the bike itself. And that gets me to about the 5/8 sag point. This whole job is going to be done with hardly any tools. You need a 3/4 inch socket. A little bit of extension is nice. A swivel extension is good at the bottom to avoid the bag bar. And you got your ratchet. I use a platform jack like this one to get the bike up to where I want it. That also allows you to run the bike up and down exactly where you want it so that the bolt holes line up in the new shocks. I use an impact gun like this with the right size guy to drive this one, so I don't have to use a ratchet. And then you can pick these up fairly cheap. It's the big Porter Cable 1/2 inch impact. These things will run like 150 foot-pounds of torque. So if you want to use this to run bigger bolts off, you can. I haven't used it so much on the bike. I use it on the cars for like lug nuts and things. But it'll pull these shock bolts off even if they have thread lock on them. So you're not sitting there kind of trying to crank through the thread lock. Jack. Just make sure it's on the 2 frame ring. You just run it up till your tire's off the ground. Yeah, 12 inch. So apparently my original measurements, 12 1/4, were a little bit of a fantasy. So these are right at 12 inch. So we're getting about a 1/4 inch of sag with the bike sitting on the ground. And then when I got on the bike, I got a little less than another 1/2 inch of sag because I was a little bit over a total of a 1/2 inch. So I was right about 5/8 of sag with these guys in the normal riding position with just a little bit of preload. But with them fully open, see the length difference here. Let's see, it's hard for you to see from this angle, but you can look at the piston itself. That's where the real difference is. You got exactly another inch of piston, and then instead of these, what legend says these are supposed to sag a 1/2 inch when you're in your riding position with the rider on it. These are supposed to sag 1 inch. So then you have more compression available, and then you have even more droop available to improve the ride. These are also the Revo-As with the adjustable rebound. They also do say that this affects the compression as well. So if you want a little bit firmer, you go to 4. If you want a little bit softer, you go to 2 for rebound and compression. And then you have your preload adjustment. And at this point, I can just blast these 2 off and call it good. All right, I did step down to a 3/8 drive on this, so I'm going to back it off by hand. The other shock is actually going to hold the swing arm in place when I pull this off. And that's it. So that's the Revo 12-inch removed. The other shock's holding the swing arm in place. The tire's actually off the ground right now. I'll get it so it's perfectly touching the ground. I'll run over to the other side and pull the other shock. So it's important to note that when the shock is fully extended and the bike is in the air, this is holding these eye-to-eye centers at 12 inches. If I have the rear tire off the ground and I remove these two, I'm going to start binding the bolts because the swing arm is going to want to drop if I don't have the other shock on. And that could booger up your threads in here. So you want to make sure there's some contact there, but you don't want weight pressing on here because then that's trying to compress the shock and that can booger up your threads too. So what we're going to do is attach the top one of the shock, the new shock, the 13-inch, and then I'm going to bring the bike up a little bit until I can perfectly run in this bolt, and I'll do the same thing on the other side. Legend sends you a couple different spacers. This one goes on the inside against the bike, and then this one goes on the outside, and then you use the OE lock washer against here, like this, and then the whole thing goes through. One of the things that Legend, I think, changed for some reason in these shocks was that they want the clip, the retaining clip up here, they want it facing out. So if I were to put that up here with it facing out, I don't have access to the adjustment knob. So this is technically the shock for the other side. So if I grab this one, I've got my clip, they want it facing out, and then my adjustments on the correct side. So put my bolt through, put my thick spacer on, put a little blue thread lock on it. And then run that guy in. You don't have to do these like a little bit at a time. You can just totally run one of them in because they're on a swivel. And once you run in, give it a good careful snug. And then because you're on a swivel, you've still got tons of room to move the shock. I'm now going to eyeball in the eye, back in the rear, and run the bike up in the air. Now I basically have a perfect shot through the lower eye. Put my spacers on in the same direction. Put a little thread lock on. Now the bike's sitting up a little bit higher with this shock on it. You don't need the swivel because you're underneath the bar. And that's it. Now you're up to like full electric glide or ultra glide height with a 13-inch, but you're going to get sag out of this, unlike the factory shock. I'm going to put the other one on the other side. It goes on the exact same way, and then I'll set this at 3. I'll drop the bike to the ground, give it a few bounces. I'll take a measurement first, drop the bike to the ground, give it a few bounces, and then I'll back these off in even increments until I have about a 1/2 inch sag with nobody on the bike, because I think the bike weight is going to be plenty to get it to a 1/2 inch sag. And then I'll get on here, have my wife help me take a couple measurements, to where it's sagging about an inch with me on the bike, and I'm gonna set it there. I'll go ride it and see what I think. To adjust these, just in case you weren't aware, you just grab the shock and you spin it this direction if you want a looser ride, or you spin it this direction if you want it stiffer. And all that's doing is spinning the bottom collar. The spring turning will actually spin the collar. Spins super easy. It's a very easy process to do. You can do it with the bike sitting on the kickstand. You just have to pull the bags off. Obviously, that's the biggest deal. All right, I got the adjustment all set. So when I came down to 12 and a half, they're normally 13. When I came down to 12 and a half with the bike by itself, and then I got on it, I got a measurement almost right at 12. So me getting on it, dropped another ½ inch, and that was pretty much it. I didn't have to make any other adjustment. From here, you would go ride it and see, is it too soft, is it too firm? You can either make some rebound adjustment here, which will firm it up a little bit, or you can stiffen up the preload, lighten up the preload here. What you want to watch out for with the rebound is, in what I've noticed with not enough preload, is if you get into a long sweeper and you're really moving fast. So if this is like a long, like the best example I've ever had was I had a prior bike wallow really bad up in South Dakota. We were up at kind of this mountain plain area, and I hit a really long sweeping left-hand turn. I passed a car on the inside. I was doing about 100 miles an hour. And the back end started doing this kind of thing on the dips. And as it was doing this, the rear tire was sliding each time it was dipping. And that's because I had loaded the bike up with more weight and I hadn't adjusted the preload, the rebound. A click on the rebound solved that problem. I never had it repeat itself. It's just that the shock was able to come back out from its compressed position too fast, and then it created this bouncing over the dips. So if you get, I refer to as wallowing the bike, the rear end feels like it's just doing this wild wallow dive thing. If you get that kind of thing, that's where you want to kick the rebound up a little bit. The rebound up a little bit. So that's what you got. This urethane stopper is pretty soft. So when you get into it, it's not a bad jolt, but with the 12-inch, when we're doing 90 miles an hour coming back from Wisconsin, when you hit those expansion joints at the bridges on I-90 or I-80, few of them hit hard enough that it really slammed the rear end bad, and it would kick the bike out of cruise control because of the impact. So I'm hoping this extra inch here alleviates a lot of that. We'll see how it goes. And the way that I measure these two right to left is that I stick my fingernail in the very bottom groove here. I can't really get a good shot of it. So I do 1, I go up to the next one, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And the last one I can fully shove my fingernail into is my count. So 10, and then I go to the other side and I make sure I have 10 on the other side as well. I get them completely even. You'll see guys complain that, well, they got this one cranked up really high and the other one cranked way down. They're trying to get everything perfect from right to left. Don't do that. Pick a side, one side or the other side, doesn't matter what side, measure it, and then do your adjustments on both sides until one side equals the length that you want. Pick the higher side, pick the lower side, whatever. There's always a little bit of twist in the trailing arm here. So if you try to get them perfect, you're going to end up with this thing all just jacked up. So pick one side, measure it, and then make your adjustment, measure one side, do your adjustments equal on each side, but only measure off of one side. If the other side's a little bit off, don't bother messing with it. Just leave it how it is. The bike will ride fine, you're not going to run into any problems, you're just going to drive yourself nuts trying to make each side equal, and it's not worth it. So that's it. So right now it sits at 12.5 inches, so essentially it's a ½ inch taller than the stock height, and it was maybe 5/8 inch taller than where my other one used to sit, because the other one had a little bit of sag on it with the bike weight just sitting there. I don't think it'll make too much difference in how the bike looks when you're, walking away from it kind of thing. And hopefully it gives me a little bit more ground clearance. The front end sags an inch because it needs that rebound distance, because otherwise the bike, I don't know if you guys have ever noticed, if you ride one person and you go over tar snakes, it really jumps, or the front end will jump around a lot because it can't slip. The front end can't extend out at all because it's maxed out all the time. The factory shocks were too stiff, or the factory forks were too stiff. So it creates a very uneasy feeling when you go into corners when you can't have any rebound in the front forks because they're just maxed out. All you have is compression. So that makes the bike feel like it's moving across the ground when it slips, as opposed to the shock, the front forks being able to move themselves without the whole bike having to go with it. So that whole uneasy sensation went away with changing to the Axio front end. But it does take some of your ground clearance away. So that's a negative for those of us that lean the bike far enough to get into that kind of thing. That's it. Post up any questions you got. I'll see what I can do to answer them. The other ones are going on sale right now. Later.